I'm Curtis Berg. I'm the director for Startup Grind in Singapore, and along with Archit Joshi and myself, we're really excited to host Dan Riegler. He's the co-founder of Karana, joining us from San Francisco at the moment, where he's been for the past couple of months, and we met when I was back in the States getting vaccinated and spending some time there, and actually was able to taste test some of the Karana products, which I can tell you they taste very much like pork. But we're really excited to talk to Dan about the meatless meat revolution. This is something that we've seen in the last few years with some other brands that have really skyrocketed in popularity and also in valuations as they were able to open up a completely new category. It's not just for vegans or vegetarians anymore, but it's actually for people that also eat meat and enjoy meat because it does taste like meat, actually. So, Dan, welcome to Startup Grind. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. I first want to start, you and your co-founder Blair, you started the company in Singapore back in 2018, but maybe walk us back to what you guys were doing beforehand, because you're not really from the food space or the food industry. You kind of started this with not that much experience from that. So what was your background and how did you get started with this?
So, I mean, the original connection, I think for me, came more through the agriculture side. So, I've always been really passionate about two things in life. One is food. So, I've always been an avid consumer of food and appreciator of food, but I had not worked inside the industry. Although I did dabble as a food writer for a few years, but I I've always been really into food and enjoyed it. I've also at sustainability. And I didn't really connect those two things until I started working on projects more related to agriculture and food production and seeing firsthand, a lot of the issues, a lot of things that were just not going to be sustainable in the long term. Working in various countries around Southeast Asia, a lot of that was consulting finance type work, but a lot of it touched agriculture related projects. So that sort of gave me a bit of an insight into the space and a lot of the need to change. And that's what ultimately led me on the journey to starting Karana, which was, at the beginning and has continued to be very much focused on the ingredients that we use and the agriculture side of it as much as that consumer piece and the end product side.
Yeah, and one of the things maybe you can talk about, and it's on your website, the name Karana. How did you guys come up with that?
So that comes from two origins. So one is a Hindi and Sanskrit word, which means to do or doing. And so, our brand is all about taking action. It's about making better choices. And the other meaning comes from a Balinese phrase, Trahita Karana, which is about achieving prosperity through balance and harmony with nature. And so balance and being more balanced, bringing more balance to our food system through those choices is very much central to sort of what motivates us, the company values, and what we hope to have an impact on in the world.
Right. So, you had done some food writing. You kind of, always been a lover and appreciate food, a bit of a foodie like myself. And you and your co-founder, how did you and Blair link up? And what's the connection there for when you guys started the company?
So I had sort of started the company initially, started setting up the supply chain, started getting some things going, focusing in on jackfruit as our first ingredient. That was one of the first, decisions made around the company. We were looking at a number of things that were sort of, aligned with my values and the values we were setting for Karana around the kinds of ingredients, the impact on the farming side, the environment, the communities in which they're grown, as well as being something that improves health and can be turned into really interesting products. So that led us to jackfruit. And then Blair and I connected shortly after that at a conference in San Francisco where Blair was living, and he was working with a couple of startups that were already active in the plant-based and cell-based meat space, and was looking to do something that had more of a connection to Asia. We were both very aligned on where we sort of saw the needs for products in that region. And we just connected, stayed in touch, and eventually started working together. And since then, the company's really evolved a lot.
As usually how it happens with co-founders. You meet somewhere, you stay in touch, you have an idea, and then you just start executing on it. So the company started in 2018. I first saw you guys on CNBC. You've been on CNN as well and gotten some publicity. You're in a few restaurants in Singapore and Hong Kong right now. the jackfruit it's kind of interesting because I actually, here in Taipei, I've actually talked to people and said, oh yeah, I've done like, some jackfruit based kind of pulled pork. It's a very fibrous meat, and it lends itself pretty well as a substitute. So how much science or engineering, re-engineering, I should say, did you guys actually have to do with the jackfruit to kind of achieve the taste and the texture and the quality that you guys wanted?
Well, sort of, I mean, our mission in all of this is to really preserve the integrity of these ingredients as much as possible, but also to turn them into really dynamic, interesting consumer products. And to, I mean, we use jackfruit because it has this really interesting textural application, but also for the other reasons I mentioned, because it's an amazing ingredient from a sustainability standpoint. So ultimately, we want to get people eating as much jackfruit, and in the future there will be other things beyond jackfruit as possible. So we do a lot of different things to it to bring it to market in different interesting ways. So that's turning it into a pork as the first step, and then turning that into a range of different products. So we have, a fair amount of IP and tech that goes into how we work with the product from really the farm through to end product formats. So there is quite a lot of knowledge. I mean, jackfruit as a meat alternative has existed forever. I mean, in countries like Sri Lanka, where we source primarily from, as well as other places we've spent a lot of time in the region, in India and Thailand, Indonesia, there's this deep cultural heritage around using jackfruit as a meat substitute. They're really amazing dishes and things that have really inspired how we look at it. And we wanted to build on that and find, other interesting ways to leverage this interesting texture. And so a lot of the jackfruit products in the market are just, you can sort of get a kind of pulled pork like look out of it, but still from a texture standpoint, it's hard to get that real meatiness. So we really strive to take it that step further, to make it as delicious, as easy to work with as possible, because it's also quite challenging to work with jackfruit. It's something that if you haven't grown up cooking it, or you're really willing to invest the time and energy to learn how to work with it as a more raw ingredient, it can be quite challenging. And if you're getting it fresh in any way, then good luck to you, because it's a very, very labor intensive and difficult crop to work with.
Yeah, it's I guess it's a little bit of, it is a pork kind of substitute, or that's what you're trying to go for there. But in a lot of ways, it's its own category that you're completely opening up,
Mhm.
because it's, you're not really trying to go out there and say, hey, this is replacing pork, or this is pork meat. This is, really kind of its own thing that stands alone. And oh, by the way, kind of tastes like pork, or the products that you made, the ones I tried in San Francisco, are very much associated with pork typically. Um, you guys started it in Singapore. So take us back to 2018 when you actually started the company. Why was Singapore a great place to really kind of start this? And what were some of the resources that you were able to leverage? One of them, I think, just being the distance to Sri Lanka. It's not that far away from where your supply chain really starts.
Yeah. And when we first started, we weren't even sure, if we were, I was spending a lot of time just traveling around the region, understanding jackfruit supply chains, what was available, what we could do with it. So, it was very accessible in a different era for that. But also, I mean, even though when we did start Karana in 2018, I mean, that was before Beyond and Impossible and the big brands had really entered the market. That was plant-based, vegan meat alternatives were not hot topics, really. A lot of people were giving us some pretty funny looks when we were first talking about it. But you could see the writing on the wall. You could see that Singapore was already sort of laying the groundwork to become a hub for Asia. You could see that all the trends that were then emerging in the US would certainly start to come over there. And it was very clear that Singapore, with its business climate, with its food culture, was definitely a place to be basing a food-centered startup. So, I mean, that was always pretty clear for me. And I mean, it's been hugely valuable to have gotten the company going there in its early days and have benefited from that, and has really helped us sort of expand quickly, even during COVID in Singapore and Hong Kong, and now looking at the US as the next step.
Right. And, in Singapore, we've seen a number of cell-based meat, or kind of alternative proteins. You're now seeing a number of companies that are moving into that space and growing, and actually doing stuff in the United States as well. Um, in terms of when you started the company and going out there and doing fundraising, because you guys have raised some funds so far, what did you see as the receptivity to talking to potential investors, and to also, the receptivity to people in the food industry about, yeah, this tastes great, or this actually looks great and is what we're looking for?
I think actually people in the food industry, well, and again, it's hard to make a blanket statement here. I mean, I think you had a few people who were ahead of the curve and both sides, both in the industry and on the investor side. But early on, I mean, and this is in the US as well, but I think definitely in Asia, in the early days, people weren't too convinced. They didn't maybe fully appreciate the opportunity for the space in that region, and people were more resistant. But that has changed very, very quickly. I mean, I think we've witnessed a huge increase in interest. There's definitely an increase in investor sophistication and education around the space. There's a lot more dedicated teams and interest. That's evolving very, very quickly. But even early on, we were able to, find people to back us early, and those that came from venture funds like Big Idea Ventures. We did their accelerator program in Singapore. They were in there very early. One of our first investors, Henry Sasanto, the CEO of Mon Nissin, so one of the biggest Asian food companies, was one of our early investors. So there definitely have been, a lot of people at the forefront of that driving things in Singapore, along with a lot of support from the Singapore government.
Right, and we're seeing even more and more interest in that. In terms of bringing the product to market, so you're able to engineer it. I met some of the team behind that when I was in San Francisco, and you came up with some products. And I think if you look at some of your competitors in this space, they kind of went to the raw format of their product. They actually sell it in the meat section in grocery stores in the United States, just looking like ground beef or raw sausages or whatnot. But you guys are kind of, testing a few different sort of products. So maybe walk us through, the bringing it to market side of things. Do you actually just put your product and then make like dumplings or gyozas or sausages, or are you really kind of going more for the raw format that allows the chefs to incorporate it into dishes, or is it a combination of both?
It's a bit of both. So I mean, we have our core product that we have right now is a pork made from jackfruit. And you were talking earlier that it that's the beauty of it. It can be a pork. I mean, it very much is benchmarked to a pork and delivered in a format that people can recognize and see as pork. But again, it's a very ingredient driven product, so it can be viewed as more of a blank canvas as well. And then that becomes the basis for starting with dumplings, but a whole range of other products. So we're in the market in Singapore and Hong Kong in food service. So selling directly to restaurants and chefs. And so we give them the pork ingredient that they can turn into any number of dishes. And those are available to go and try at a lot of different restaurants in Singapore. And the products that we'll be launching into the retail space in the fairly near future, starting with the dumplings, will be more of these ready to cook type products, so more uh, finished products. And one of the reasons for that is because I think, even though plant-based is really has heated up a lot, it's definitely a space that a lot of people are looking at or trying products. As it goes mainstream, we still see there's a lot of, and this is one of the reasons why we do get very specific with, benchmarking against pork, making it familiar, making it accessible. We want to make plant-based easy. I mean, we want to make it as it's making it delicious, but it's also making it convenient. We want to present formats that people are really familiar with, where it's just easy for them to try. They're not worried about if they're going to cook it properly, how it's going to work in one dish versus another. We want people to just have a really great experience so that they're going to continue to try plant-based products. So that's why we are really interested in these finished products and want to make sure that people have the best possible interaction, and that it's, people aren't worried that they're going to mess it up and then not try it again.
Right, and it kind of opens up a whole potential segment and category. I haven't tried the pulled pork version yet, which is something I'm interested in trying, because I do love pulled pork, and slow cooking pork shoulder or something and doing carnitas. But in terms of so you've taken it to restaurants. You can get it, and it's listed on your website. And we've actually listed a link on the event page for the restaurants that are serving it in Singapore and Hong Kong. But in terms of, on the commercial side, probably convincing chefs, it's not that hard to get them to want to actually put this in their menu, because once they taste it, and that familiarity of the taste, it's not going to be hard for the consumer or the person visiting their restaurant to say, hey, yeah, I'll give this a try. But going on the retail side of things, what's that experience been like to try to bring something to market for a grocery store, or something that the consumer can bring home? How's that experience been, and where do you plan on actually launching it? Will it be Singapore and Hong Kong?
Yeah, so we'll definitely start in Singapore and Hong Kong, and we'll be looking at the US. So we're in the process of getting the US up and running over the next couple of months, in a fairly small scale. And then we'll be growing here, as well as our core markets in Singapore and Hong Kong over the next year. And yeah, I mean, retail is a tough space. CPG is a highly competitive space, but plant-based is very hot right now. And supermarkets, retailers are interested in this. A lot of them are very forward thinking, are really supportive. And there is an opportunity, and especially, I mean, where we come in with a bit of a different brand and product story and ingredient story, we get a lot of very positive feedback, and a lot of interest, and a lot of inbound interest as well. So it's it's getting more crowded and more competitive, and it's certainly, not easy, but I don't think there's been a better time in history or a better category to launch a product like this. So we're definitely, trying to take advantage of that as much as possible.
Yeah. Walk us through, the health benefits of this. One of the things that a lot of people, and I'm not going to name names specifically of other competitive brands that are in this kind of, meatless meat category, stuff that tastes like meat that's actually plant-based proteins. But, one of the things that I think, and there's a lot of stuff, if people just Google this, is, a lot of people wanted to eat healthier, so they're not going out there, they're getting the meats necessarily, they're getting the meat substitute that tastes like meat. But if you actually look at the nutrition labels of some of these things from other brands, it's actually not quite as healthy as the meat product that it is replacing necessarily, or it might be marginally better. Uh, what's the health benefits for what you guys, because you guys are really doing something which is whole plant based,
Yeah.
which is a little bit different. You're not having 80 ingredients or 40 ingredients, which some of these other products might have. So what are the health benefits to using your product and the jackfruit compared to the meat that it might be replacing?
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's core to what we do. It's about staying true to those ingredients. It's about offering something that really connects people to the source of what they're eating, and maintaining. And that's one of the jackfruit, because it is a very interesting crop that we can use in its whole form. So when we're making meat from whole plants, that's really, I think, what we're selling. I think there's so much back and forth today around what is healthy, what is not healthy, what constitutes a clean label or not. So we try and simplify as much as possible and focus on the nutrition. And for something like jackfruit, it's a low GI crop, so we use the young, unripe jackfruit. So a lot of people think jackfruit, oh, it must be sweet, there must be a lot of sugar, but actually in that unripe form, the sugars haven't formed yet. So that brings a whole different nutritional profile to it than you might expect. So again, that's low GI. It's a lot of really good fiber. There's a nice micro and macronutrient mix going on. So things like potassium, magnesium, and again, it's just, you get the benefit of eating a natural crop. I mean, we've partnered with different nutritionists, to really understand this and continue to. There's a lot of interesting research showing that jackfruit, especially the young unripe jackfruit, has very positive effects on reducing diabetes risk, or reversing some of the effects of diabetes. So there's lots we're continuing to look into to really understand the full impact of this. But ultimately, it's about, you know, just making products that use ingredients that people want to eat. I think people really want transparency and want to know what's going into the food they're eating. So that's what we're trying to do. And as we can continue to add, functional nutrition into it, we would love to continue doing that.
Yeah, that functional nutrition is really important. And I think a lot of people don't realize, when you're doing that whole plant based, it really kind of means that you're not taking the product and doing a bunch of things to it in a lab or in an R&D setting. You're really just trying to use that at the core of the product and enhance it.
Yeah.
And certainly some of the products that I tried in San Francisco, I think I tried 4 products in San Francisco, all very good. In fact, I still tell people the minced pork one that I had, I was like, "Are you guys sure you're not giving me pork?" Because I get that actual taste, of in my mouth, and that kind of that fatty taste that you kind of coats the back of your throat, which was really good. Walk us through kind of that supply chain that you talked about. It's the young jackfruit, so this is something that's cultivated and grown in Sri Lanka, where you're getting this from. Does that present any logistical challenges to scaling up faster? I mean, if you're in the US market and you really want to go retail, that upstream supply chain really needs to be there. What are the constraints and the challenges that you guys have faced in sourcing the raw ingredients for this?
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely challenging, and it's been a long process for us to really understand that supply chain, get deep into it, and again, that's a bit of my background is working in those kinds of markets and similar types of projects related to agriculture and supply chains. So that allowed us to really get deep into it, to really understand it. We looked at a lot of different markets. We have chosen Sri Lanka to focus on because there's a really interesting uh, cultural element around jackfruit. Jackfruit is ubiquitous in Sri Lanka. There's all different phases of the fruit at which they eat it, and you have trees all over. It's actually illegal to cut down a jackfruit tree in Sri Lanka because it's considered such a national pride. But despite that, huge amounts of jackfruit go to waste because it's so available and because it just grows wild often, or it grows. I mean, most of our jackfruit is sourced through a network of smallholder plots. That are farming essentially wild in the forests and are running these natural regenerative farms where they're growing higher value crops like pepper, turmeric, cacao, and they have jackfruit trees growing around which they use to shield the other crops. They'll grow the pepper vines up the jackfruit trees, and sure, they'll consume some of the fruits themselves. They'll sell some in the market, but these trees are huge and high yielding. So you get an immense jackfruit yield that is going to waste. So 60-70% and up can be wasted in places like Sri Lanka and India. So for us, it's about how do we tap into those waste streams? How do we, because we always want to make sure that we're not going in and disrupting a local supply chain, especially with some of these new, lesser commercialized, not commoditized crops. You have to be careful there. So that's very important to us, that we're making a positive impact on the community we're working in. So we look at how we can create more value, especially for farmers. We work very closely with the farmers. We're always looking at how we can better understand different ways to cultivate, to source and harvest jackfruit, different ways we can bring it to market. But there's a lot that goes into managing a supply chain like that that's less established. It's not like we just bring in, a powdered form of a protein isolate or something. I mean, it's very hands-on. So, but that's a lot of the reason of why we did it and why we built it this way. I mean, and there's a lot of value in that because you're seeing now a lot of strain on logistics and supply chains, a lot of shortages and rising prices in a lot of commodity markets. And, having more ownership in the supply chain, doing something a bit differently does create value in the long run.
Right, and that's fairly interesting that about 60 to 70% of the jackfruit products that some of these farms have are going to waste, which actually, lends to the fact that if you need to really scale up, there's going to be that supply there. The product is, so you bring it in from Sri Lanka. It's made in Singapore at the moment, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, you touched on the supply chain issues. This is something that the world has faced, whether it's technology or food based. in terms of logistics? Do you think about potentially making this in other markets, or actually making it closer to the source and then exporting it, or how does that factor into your planning and decision making going forward, as you kind of plot the course of the company over the next coming years?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, so we have actually designed our supply chain exactly with that in mind, to be sort of as flexible and modular as possible, and that's definitely, you know, helping us navigate through some of the current challenges today. And part of that is to reduce our carbon footprint and to be more sustainable. So, for instance, our finished products like the dumplings are frozen products, and we want to minimize the amount that we're shipping a product like that, across the world. So we will always try and localize those supply chains as much as possible. Find different ways to manage things more efficiently. But also, it's because we believe food should be local. So, as we do move into different markets, we will look, at different regions where we can source jackfruit, but also at different crops beyond jackfruit. I mean, we have plans to look at a lot of different things. Some stuff we're already thinking about, some stuff we'll be looking at in the future, that we can set up and source in a similar way, but closer to the end market. So, I mean, our goal is to really localize and find more of these really sustainable, really interesting and dynamic crops, and ways to bring them to markets where it makes sense to.
Right, and that it kind of leads me to another question. We'll open up the floor to Q&A. So to anybody listening in on this, if you have a question for Dan, what we'll do and what we'd like to do at Startup Grind is, don't write it in the chat. Just tell me you have a question in that general chat, and then what I will do is I will unmute you so you can actually and allow you to turn your video and microphone on, and then you can ask Dan that question one on one. And we keep it as engaging as possible, since we're doing virtual events and not our in-person events. But that's another question that I have: is what other products could you potentially expand into beyond doing, for lack of a better term, a pork substitute with jackfruit? Are there other things in other categories and other verticals that you're looking at that could be appealing? And does cell-based meat or lab-grown meat fit into your product mix, or is it kind of an area you don't really see yourself going, and you'll let some of your other competitors out there kind of keep that space?
Yeah, so in terms of other products, I mean, there's a lot of different things we would love to do. We're pretty focused on, starting with our pork and all the different things we can turn it into. So, I mean, starting with our dumpling skews, uh, bows, various other things. There's pretty much endless products that we can put that into. So we have a lot of ideas. We're going to see, what sits well in the market, and roll that out in a thoughtful way. But then, yes, we have lots of big plans for the future around other things we can do with jackfruit, other things we can do beyond jackfruit. I mean, there's other we think the seafood space is very interesting and ripe for a lot of disruption. How soon we're going to go into something like that, we need to take things step by step. So we're very focused on execution at the moment with what we do have in front of us. But yes, I mean, there's always a lot of exciting things to look at. But look, I think at the end of the day, it's also, we're very early in this sector. Plant-based is just starting to get to that mainstream threshold level. I think the point you raised about, it being its jackfruit, or this kind of whole plant category being its own thing versus like the more mock meat type products. I think the industry is going to evolve very much in that way, where it's going to be about introducing new ingredients in different formats. So I think the products that we may be launching 5, 7, 10 years from now may be less focused on being a pork and more focused on being something else. But we'll see. I mean, our goal is to stay as close to the consumer and as close to the market as possible, understand what is driving adoption in plant-based, especially as it gets beyond the early adopters, and to adjust and evolve with the market. And
Yeah.
so you asked about cell-based as well. So I'm personally, I'm a big supporter of the cell-based space. I've tried the Just Nuggets. I've tried a couple of the other products. I think cell-based is super interesting. I think there is still a long way to go from a technology standpoint. I think that some of the ingredient plays around cell-based are quite interesting, and then there may be paths to market, which maybe there is a role for Karana to play at some point. So we're not ruling anything out. Like I said, I think the industry is going to evolve a lot, and there's going to be a lot of totally interesting things and new technologies coming into play in the next 5 years or so. But we're going to see how it evolves, what makes sense, and again, what consumers are demanding.
Yeah, one thing I did want to ask you about is launching this and the branding side of things. You know, you're kind of it really is a pork substitute, and you guys have kind of marketed it as such because that's a familiar taste or texture for a large part of the world. There's also a large part of the world that doesn't eat pork, and you have to change your calculus a little bit and how you market it. Have you guys debated this about when you take this to new markets about how do you go out there and really get people to try it, or is it possible to open up and just have this stand alone as its own kind of jackfruit meat category or something, which might have some people confused at first, but how does that factor in terms of the positioning of it?
Yeah. No, I mean it's an endless debate for us, and an endless, discussion around I think at the end of the day, you can't please everyone. So it's really, I think that's one of the big learnings of running a startup is how to bring your own ego and
Yeah.
idea of what products should and can be down, and to listen more to what consumers and what the market wants. So that's the process we go through. We aim to make great products and find the best fit for them. So right now we feel that that is in the pork category, and that's a very open space, that is the most consumed meat in the world, that is a meat that is generally horrible for our health, horrible for the environment, and horrible for the animals and people working in that space. And we're very happy to be trying to put a dent in it. So there's a lot we can do. There's a huge market there, and when it makes sense and with what, we will find ways to expand our product mix.
Right, and just want to let everyone know if you have a question, the Q&A function is open. You can type it there, or you can just say I have a question, and then I'll unmute you so you can ask Dan. So for any of our attendees, I know Yeman is staying up late in London just for this talk, or Yolanda, if you guys have questions for Dan, just give a shout there in the chat. But one of the things I was thinking about is, I love bacon. Pork is, I tried eating right for my blood type. That is one of the diets that's out there. And I will admit, just being a foodie, I don't really follow it much. But pork was one of the products for my blood type that's really not beneficial to it. I love bacon. Is there a possibility that you are able to make some sort of bacon substitute product that tastes like bacon? This is
I
really
mean,
personally.
I tend to stay from bacon, and I can sympathize with you because I'm someone who, for most of my life, was a very hardcore carnivore. I grew up between Austria and the U.S., so I ate a lot of pork. I mean, I was a
What's
bacon
it?
guy. I was a sausage guy.
Yeah.
Uh, and I thought, man, I can never live without that. And I'm mostly plant-based at this point. I really don't eat pork unless I'm doing something for benchmarking reasons, and even then I try and avoid it, and I feel much better. I mean, a lot of it was initially I thought that's what I would miss the most, and I really don't. Um, so I think that journey is a very personal one for everyone, and you need to do it in a way that works for you. And if you need to eat bacon occasionally to reduce other forms of meat and pork consumption, you have to indulge yourself a little bit. But are we going to make a bacon? I mean, we'll make anything that we feel we can do really, really well. If we have something in front of us that allows us to make a really convincing bacon, then sure, we would look at it. But I think it's very difficult, and I have some good friends in the space who are making really good bacon products. I have a lot of respect for them. So I let them do that, because bacon is something that people have very high expectations around and is very, very difficult to replicate. For me, I mean, it's similar, same basic product, but pork belly. I always wanted to do something
Yeah.
with pork belly, and that's just really hard. I mean, fat is really, really difficult with plant based. You find ways to do what works, but it's about finding those products where you can make it work well. And again, as we get better at what we would do, as the technology and knowledge in the space evolves, then I don't see any reason why we can't be eating really compelling plant-based bacon in the near future, whether we're making it or someone else is making it. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, we will try to make everything we can that is delicious, that fits our values, and that will get people eating in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, the pork belly. I mean, I enjoy getting that dish, in some of the restaurants in and around Asia. But it always just feels unhealthy when you eat it. I love bacon, but you look at when you cook bacon, all that pork fat that's there, and it's not, really that good for you technically from a nutritional
It's
benefit.
terrible for you. It's
It is.
that's been
It,
established.
but it tastes so good sometimes. But I think to your point about replicating, it's really that fat content that sets those sorts of cuts of pork meat apart from like a more leaner version, like a pork carnitas, pulled pork or something like that. And that's probably where the challenge is going to lie. Where you probably would have to refine the product a bit more, and then have to add ingredients, and then before you know it, you've got like 40 ingredients on the nutrition label or something. One thing you did talk about was seafood potentially in the future, and imitation crab meat has been around for a very long time. And actually, I think most Americans and consumers also around the world probably don't, when they got the crab rolls or the crab stick meat in sushi restaurants in the West, probably didn't even realize that it's actually not real crab meat because they did such a great job of, getting it the texture right. I've never personally liked it. So, if you're able to innovate in that, imitation crab meat that actually tastes like crab meat, maybe that's a ripe space.
I mean, seafood, like I mentioned it, but it's another challenging one because people have very, specific ideas around, especially something like crab or what specific seafood. I mean, again, like bacon, those are products, those are food items that people have real connections, really set expectations and ideas around. So it's tough to take those on. And again, we look for the pun intended lower hanging fruit. I mean, it's one of the reasons we've gone with dumplings, because like, what is a dumpling? If you look at something like a dumpling, every culture has a dumpling in some form. It's the leftover meat that's blended with the leftover vegetables, seasoned to make it stretch it out as much as possible, and gets repackaged nicely into something that makes it delicious and tasty. So many of the dishes we eat were ways to minimize waste, and that's really what we look at doing as a company as well. So that's why we love it as a category. And you have an empanada is a dumpling in another form, tamale, a pierogi, a tortellini. So this concepts, I mean, that for us is a concept that gets us excited. And these kinds of things where we can have really connect with people, because again, a dumpling is still something that connects with a lot of people in a lot of different cultures and is universally loved. But there's a little bit more flexibility in what consumers will accept. So bacon scares me a little bit as a product category, as to some of the higher end seafood. But there's still a huge world out there to bring in lots of different forms of pork, seafood into different formats that people eat on massive quantities, and especially the types of products which are the worst, just relying on industrial farming, on the worst forms of fishing and trawling. And yeah, there's a lot to improve on, beyond the more premium categories.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of bacon, we've had turkey bacon for a long time. I believe there's chicken bacon. In the Middle East, going to Shake Shack, for instance, I believe it's veal bacon, which actually I really liked. It was pretty tasty. But in terms of having something plant based, might be a bit of a challenge. We do have a question from Yemen in London. and I hope I'm getting your name right, Eamon. What are the biggest objections motivators to refusing whole plant-based choices like Karana when available? And what do you see as the key to changing the mind of meat eaters to try plant-based substitutes?
So biggest objections, I mean, I think honestly, it's people are skeptical that it's gonna be as satisfying as meat. I think people have this idea that, and I had this for a long time, this was me, that if you eat a meal without meat, you're not gonna be satisfied, that's not a real meal. I think that's still a very pervasive mindset. It's starting to change, it's definitely come a long way. Obviously, I've changed, and I see a lot of people in my family, friends, and peer groups, who have been on similar paths. So I think that is something that just takes a long time and takes what you do for that is just make better products. I mean, you have to convince people, and some people will take longer to convince, some people will resist, but that's changing, that's happening. For us, again, it's about making products that are really delicious, really accessible, and tell a really compelling story. And we think if we can get those three things right, then people will you know appreciate that and buy our products, and we think that more people doing things like that and more good products in the space will help push this along as well. So I think as the industry grows, I mean, the amount of products, the quality of products just in the last 1 2 years is just amazing, and we're so early in this cycle, and food trends take a long time to really sink in and change. I mean, if you look at how industries like craft beer have evolved, um, you know 10 years ago, it was a very, very limited space. Now it's totally ubiquitous. Sushi, when it first came to the US in the early 80s, I mean, it was before my time, but I've read about it. It was not considered a very normal or appealing thing to a lot of people. And that has certainly changed. So I think it's part of it is continuing to do what we do, which is, you know, bring interesting products to market. And part of it is just being a little bit patient as well, because it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah, and you talk about, I think about kind of 10 or 15 years ago, vegan or vegetarian alternative options. I think one Thanksgiving, in my family's household, we had somebody that was vegan or vegetarian, and there was a tofu based turkey roast of some sorts, which was just like, no. As a meat eater or something, that's not something I'm going to touch. But what Beyond Burger, for instance, is very common actually here in Taiwan. You can get it at Costco. You can get it at even some local supermarkets. And I've actually had it, and I'm like, oh, as a meat eater, I like this because that taste and that texture is already there. And I think what you've seen over the last few years, particularly in kind of the substitute categories, like take dairy for instance. You have cheese products that the one that I really like. You can't get it in Asia, but in the United States, for anybody watching, is the Miyokos, the cultured butter, basically.
I
I
think I
actually,
think it is available in Singapore. Actually,
oh,
I
it might
might
be,
be.
yeah, maybe it's definitely not available here in Taipei, but maybe it is in Singapore, which would be great.
It's a great
And
product.
I actually found that to be better than
Mhm.
an actual butter. And I love toasting a bagel and just slathering it with a bunch of butter, and that flavor is there. So you guys are kind of piggybacking off of that
Oh
uh
yeah.
base.
No, completely. And I mean, I think that's very typical, is that when you actually do open yourself up to this, when you get over that initial hurdle and you start to explore, sure, not every product is going to be great and not everything is going to be a perfect substitute. If you're trying to, replace a roast turkey with a piece of tofu, it's not going to be the same experience. And that's why, bacon, and especially as Americans, we tend to eat a bit blander, very meat center of plate focus. The meat is the star of the show. Even on a burger, I mean, you can dress it up with pickles and lettuce and tomato and things, but it's really about the meat. Um, Whereas a lot of other cuisines are much more about a balance and a more nuanced blend of flavors and spices. So, for me, when I first really started moving away from meat in any conscious way, was just because I was hanging out in Chiang Mai for a while, and so I was eating a lot of just vegetarian Thai food just because of the people I was spending time with. And that was the first time where I just connected. I was like, actually, I enjoy a lot of these dishes even more without the meat because the quality of meat being used in, those dishes was not particularly good. And when you're having it just with the vegetables, you really get the flavors, the balance of things so much more. And then I found similar things with Indian and other very flavor intense cuisines. And that's really what sort of led me to start to transition, really think, okay, do I need meat in this? Is the meat actually adding anything here? And that was really a good way for me to look at it. And I think a lot of people have a similar journey in their own way where they really like find what works for them. And then that's a gateway to just making better
Yeah.
choices.
And as somebody that's a foodie, it comes down to flavor and texture. And, if there's something, what I particularly found was like with Beyond or Impossible uh, burgers, I've had the Impossible burger and another burger at a restaurant in Singapore, one with the, beef and one with the Impossible meat. And I actually preferred the Impossible one for that specific burger. So it's like, if that's your kind of line that you need to cross for a consumer, it's, do you have something that tastes better or as good as what it's quote unquote replacing?
And
And we're getting there, it seems.
Absolutely. And again, food is about like food is deeply personal, right? Like there's so much that goes into food. It's about how you're experiencing. I mean, how most people, when you're just tasting something to say, okay, is this the same as this? That's not how most people experience food. Most people are experiencing food as part of, a social or family experience or something that they've had a part in preparing or it's part of a restaurant experience. So there's so many elements that go into food as an interaction. And the other point is, we're not used to, as a species, eating this much meat. I mean, the amount of meat we eat and the expectation that we should, or at least deserve to have meat in every meal, that's a very recent phenomenon. I mean, it's been happening for longer in the West. But even so, I mean, there was a period in the US not too long ago, I mean, a couple of generations back, where you would not necessarily, an average family would not have meat every day, or if you did, it would be stretched out very much, and much smaller quantities. So this whole idea that, oh, like meat is, a very large part of the human diet is quite wrong.
Yeah, and there's lots of research that has been done on the health benefits of meat or having a plant-based diet, and that's a whole nother topic for discussion another time. Yolanda's got a question, and I'll read it out here for everybody. Interesting to hear your comments on how retail seems to be in your eyes. I have always hoped for the complete meat substitute, ready for the kitchen and cooking with multiple textures and flavors available for consumers. What needs to happen before that picture can be realized?
Hmm. Well, for us as a company, I mean, it's a lot of work to get a retail product to market, and COVID, everything today is challenging. So, I mean, it's just a question of getting everything in place and getting it into stores, and we are working on it. In general, I mean, I would say there are some very good products in the market in retail that you can get in Singapore and other places. Uh, that I mean, again, I think it depends what if you're looking for something that really recreates meat, like I think Impossible is a good product for a burger. If you're looking again, if you want, I don't eat a lot of heavily processed stuff, um, so I don't cook stuff like that too often. But I think there are also a lot of other interesting products like ours that are coming in the pipeline. Again, this is early in the space, and most companies, big food companies, take years and years to get a product into the market. It's not easy, so it is coming. And again, it just needs a bit of patience, probably.
Yeah, and Yolanda follows up and says, I guess my question is on both accessibility and affordability for the entire industry. And
Mm.
that was actually a follow-up question I had was, you know, um, with cell-based meat, for instance, the cost of that. I remember when they were first doing that for beef, it was like, here's a cell-based burger, and it would cost like $3,000 or some ridiculous amount. Is there a premium on your product, or because of the supply chain and where you're getting it from, and the lack of needing to process it so much, does the cost actually compare to pork or another type of substitute, or is the premium, less than 20% or 30% that's more digestible for a consumer?
Yeah. I mean, our products are priced at right now in Singapore, we're pretty much at the same level as the sort of the type of pork product that a restaurant would be buying. So is it the cheapest pork in the market? No, but it's the type of customers that we're mostly targeting right now. And look, the market is still more at that premium segment. I mean, we're still in the early adopter period. Those tend to be more premium customers. And accessibility is hugely important for this industry. The costs need to come down. There are a lot of companies, a lot of people working on that. That also just comes with scale. I mean, it's your costs are partially derived from your ingredients, and we do have some advantages on that front. But bringing a product to market again is not cheap, and doing that as a small company with limited bargaining power these days with logistics costs and just the rising costs of everything, it's a very, very high cost, low margin business by nature. And a lot of the incumbent products, meat products, large industrial produced food products in general, are heavily subsidized, are artificially cheap. So it's challenging, and that's something that I think everyone in the space is agreed on and working on, that we need to get prices down. We need to make this accessible, but also the market is still developing, and you know, it, we're talking about plant-based meats and these kind of convenience-focused products, which again, that category is a premium category. I mean, people who go shop for frozen food in supermarkets, those are premium shoppers. People who are looking to get access to more nutritious food, there's a lot of different ways we can talk about food accessibility and making sure that nutritious food is getting to the people who need it. So that's a broader industry issue that needs a lot of addressing, and a lot of the incumbent players in the meat and other spaces should be very focused on that. I don't think it really falls on this tiny plant-based startups to solve both food accessibility and sustainability and everything else at exactly the same time.
And there's a lot of the big food, so to speak, or big food as we call it in the United States. They're all looking at plant-based alternatives and seeing the growth of that category, and it really can't be ignored. We're kind of approaching the end of this, so if anyone's got a last question for Dan, just put it in the Q&A there, or let us know if you want to raise your hand and ask Dan directly. I guess also, you talked about the cost, and we've seen, of the startup journey for Beyond and Impossible, and then the valuations that they have, and the valuations that they have, but yeah, Beyond being publicly traded on the stock market. There is a lot of money that went into getting that product and bringing it to market and the R&D. What does your fundraising journey look like as you look out into the horizon as to what you're needing to bring your product to market and to really make an impact?
Yeah, I mean, well, we're always racing like any other startup. I mean, like I said, it takes a lot of capital to bring a product to market, to get visibility in front of people. We're doing that across multiple markets. So I mean, we raised our seed round last year. We're actually currently raising right now, primarily from existing investors, and we will be doing our Series A in the not too distant future. So that will be a significant raise for us. The market is quite you know hot at the moment. There's a lot of capital flowing around. There's a lot of interest in this space, so that's been fortunate for us, and I think a lot of other people in the space. But yeah, I mean, that always takes a huge amount of time and is never easy. But I think it is a good time to be in this space, and we are aiming to take advantage of that. But you always then have to watch out for, I mean, we're already seeing, I mean, valuations and things are getting pretty crazy, and that will bring its own set of challenges sort of as the industry develops.
Yeah. and Singapore has been very forward thinking on, kind of food tech and everything. And, you look at where some investments, significant investments have been made with capital from Singapore into some of those other kind of alt meat companies. It's definitely something where Singapore is very much a hub for it still.
Absolutely, and the government, I mean, supports like their matching funds in Singapore that will go along with other investors. There's a lot of support from some of the big investors in Singapore, so it's a very exciting ecosystem to be part of.
Yeah, great place to be. There's no more questions. That kind of wraps things up here nicely. And you can go out and get dinner there in San Francisco because it's only 7 o'clock at night there. But Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to come to Startup Grind and share your journey and experience and answer some questions from our community and our audience. And we wish you all the best and hope to talk to you again soon.
No, my pleasure, and thanks everyone for your questions. Thanks for having me.